I had not spoken in 93 years. Not a word, not a sound. The curse had taken my voice the night Edra of the Hollows was driven from Drevholt's gates, her last act before the pine forest swallowed her. A binding laid on my throat and my wolf in the thin thread of the mate bond alike, sealed so completely that even my counselors, after the first terrible week of waiting, had stopped looking at my mouth when I raised my hand to write. 93 years. I had governed by ink and presence. My handwriting had become famous across 3 kingdoms, a tight, precise script that my head counselor Bren had learned to read at a glance, that my stewards could interpret from across a long table. When I walked into a room, wolves still moved aside. I was still the alpha of Drevholt, still the largest pack in the northern reaches, still feared and respected and obeyed. I simply could not be heard. My wolf had been the hardest loss. He was not gone. I could feel him the way you feel a fire through a stone wall, present and alive but unreachable, his voice sealed behind the same binding that had taken mine. In the early years I had tried everything. Blood rites, moon circles, healers from every pack kingdom within 3 weeks' ride. Each one came with great ceremony. Each one left in silence, which was, I had noted more than once, my natural condition, but theirs by defeat. The bond was the cruelest part. My wolf had always known the mate bond was out there, the way you know a door exists even when you cannot find the handle. Before Edra's curse, he had been restless with it, that particular quality of waiting that a wolf carries when its fated mate has not yet arrived. After the curse, even that restless certainty was sealed away. I could not feel whether she was near or far, living or lost. I had stopped trying to find her in the 2nd decade, because the trying had become its own wound. 93 years. I had learned patience the way a stone learns the river, not by choosing it, but by surviving it. It was Bren who brought me the news about the latest failure. He set the written report on my desk with the particular angle that meant he was sorry. The healer from Varenthome had spent 4 days performing her most intricate seal breaking. A rite that had, according to the documents she'd submitted, dissolved 3 separate blood curses on 2 other pack lords in the past decade. She had left Drevholt at dawn, citing what her notes called a binding of unusual architecture, and what I suspected she meant was, I cannot help you, and I would prefer to be somewhere else before you realize it. I read the report. I set it down. I walked to the window that overlooked the gray pine forest and the mist that never quite lifted from the valley, and I thought, with the particular quiet that comes from having exhausted hope so many times that it no longer hurts to exhaust it again. That is that then. Bren, who had been with me for 40 of the 93 years and could read my back as easily as my handwriting, came to stand beside me. There is one more name, he said. It came through Ashvin, the outer villages, not a trained healer, a remedy keeper. She works with plants mostly, fevers, root sickness, things of that kind. He paused. I would not have mentioned her at all except that the village elder who sent her name said she once brought a gray wolf back from a bone fever that 3 other healers had given up on. He said she talked to it for 6 days straight until it decided to live. I looked at him. He lifted one shoulder, the gesture he used when he knew an idea was impractical but had run out of practical ideas. She likely cannot help. But she is willing to come, and the journey is only 2 days. I thought, he stopped. I thought you might want someone new in the room. It has been some time. I picked up my pen and wrote in the script he knew so well, send for her. Bren nodded and went to arrange it. I stood at the window a while longer. The pine forest was very still. The mist moved through it in slow rivers. Below, in the courtyard, 2 of my pack's youngest wolves were playing in the gray morning light, tumbling over each other in the way of young things who have not yet learned to be dignified about their joy. I watched them for longer than I meant to. I had ruled this kingdom well. I was, by any measure, a good king. My pack was fed and defended and governed fairly. The curse had taken my voice and my wolf's presence and the possibility of a mate, but it had not taken my capability. I told myself this often. It had become one of the fixed points I returned to, the way a ship returns to anchor. It was true as far as it went. It did not go very far. She arrived on a gray afternoon, 2 days later, in a cart that had clearly seen better decades. My steward had gone to the gate to receive her, expecting, I think, something more impressive. Varenthome's healer had arrived with a retinue and a chest of sealed instruments. What came through the Drevholt gates instead was a woman in a plain brown traveling cloak, carrying a canvas bag that looked as though it had been repaired several times in different colors of thread, and an expression of such uncomplicated curiosity that my steward, according to Bren's account later, had stood holding his formal greeting and forgotten to say it. She looked at the keep. She looked at the pine forest that ringed it. She looked at the mist, and then she said to no one in particular, "There's something in the ground here. What's the soil like under all this stone?" My steward said he had no idea. She said that was all right. She'd find out later, and followed him inside. I watched this from the upper gallery, the place I had taken to standing when I wanted to observe arrivals without being observed in turn. I had been doing this for decades. It was, I had found, one of the few forms of privacy left to a man who communicated by having his written words read aloud by others. She did not look like a curse breaker. She was not young, but not old, somewhere in the middle of life, with the kind of face that had spent time outdoors in all weathers and looked comfortable for it. Her hair was dark and simply dressed. She walked with the slight forward lean of a person who is always heading somewhere with a purpose. When she crossed the main hall and the light from the high windows fell across her, she paused and tilted her head back to look at the carved stone ceiling, and she smiled to herself in a private, pleased way, as though the ceiling had done something unexpectedly good. I noticed her hands. They were a working person's hands, capable and unhurried. She had them wrapped around the strap of her canvas bag, and she held it lightly. I went downstairs. Bren brought her to the small receiving room rather than the council chamber. I had asked him to do this for the remedy keeper. The council chamber had too much ceremony in it, and ceremony had not helped. The small receiving room had 2 chairs and a fire and a table with ink and paper for my half of any conversation. She came in, looked around the room with the same uncomplicated interest she had given the ceiling, and then looked at me. I was larger than most men in my pack. 93 years had not diminished me in body, whatever they had done elsewhere. I had been told more than once that I was difficult to stand before comfortably, even for people who had not come to attempt to break a curse. Most of the healers had made some effort to appear unaffected and not quite succeeded. She looked at me the way she had looked at the ceiling, not afraid, not performing unconcern, simply present. "You'll be the Alpha King," she said. "I'm Senna. From Ashfin, though you'll have gathered that." She set her canvas bag down and sat in one of the chairs without waiting to be invited, which was not how any of the healers had done it, and which I found, unexpectedly, that I did not mind. "I'm going to be honest with you from the start, since you seem like a man who prefers it. I don't know if I can help you. I'm not a seal breaker. I know plants and fevers and a few things about why living creatures give up on themselves. That's the extent of what I do." She folded her hands in her lap. "I'm told other healers have tried and not managed. I'd like to know what they tried if you can tell me, so I don't repeat it pointlessly." I sat in the other chair. I picked up the pen that was already on the table. "They tried blood rites, seal dissolution rites, moon circle bindings. One used a relic claimed to break any curse of Pakwitch origin. None produced any result." She read this without hurrying. "Any result at all, no change in any direction." "Nothing I could detect." She leaned back in the chair, not the tense, effortful leaning of someone trying to look relaxed, but the actual leaning of a person thinking. "That's interesting. Not failed exactly then, just no purchase. Like the curse has no surface for those approaches to catch on." She tilted her head. "Can I ask what the curse actually does? I know you can't speak." Is that the whole of it? No, I wrote it quickly, then paused, then added, I cannot reach my wolf. And the mate bond thread, which should be present in any alpha of sufficient age, I cannot feel it. The curse sealed all three simultaneously. She read this. Something shifted in her expression, not pity, which I had seen enough of to last several lifetimes, but a particular kind of attention, the kind that meant she was thinking carefully about what she'd just been told. Voice, wolf, and bond, she said, all at once. That's a thorough piece of work. She looked at the fire for a moment. Was it a pack witch? Is that what I was told? Yes, Edra of the Hollows. She was expelled from Drevholt's territory 93 years ago for reasons unrelated to this curse. The curse was her final act before she left. We believe it was opportunistic, a way to damage the pack on her way out. Opportunistic, Senna said. Do you believe that? I looked at her. She was watching me steadily. I ask because I've seen a few things in my work that were called opportunistic and turned out to be more deliberate than that. The thoroughness of it, voice and wolf and bond together, that doesn't feel like spite done in haste. I had thought this myself. In 93 years I had thought it many times and had nowhere useful to put the thought. I wrote, I have wondered the same, but Edra has been dead for 60 years. What deliberateness might have been behind it is beyond recovering. Maybe, she said, and then to my considerable surprise she did not pursue the question. She simply nodded as though she were filing it away and said, well, I'll need a few days at least to get any sense of things, if that's all right. You may have whatever time you need, I wrote. Every healer before you was given the same. Thank you, she picked up her bag. I'd like to start tonight if you're willing. Nothing formal, I just want to sit with you for a bit. Is that strange? I looked at her. I know it sounds strange, she said, without any embarrassment about it. But I've found with sick things that the most useful thing you can do first is simply be near them and see what you notice. If you'd rather not, I'll start tomorrow with some of the more conventional assessments. I wrote, tonight is acceptable. She smiled at that, a small, genuine smile, and said she'd find her room and return after supper. I sat in the chair after she left. The fire crackled. Outside, the mist pressed against the window with its usual patience. Something had shifted in the room since she'd come into it. I couldn't name it. I had been cataloging the small sensations of rooms for 93 years, the particular quality of silence in a space, the weight of absence, because sensation was most of what I had left and I had become careful about it. This room felt different than it had before she arrived. Not warmer, not louder, just less sealed. I did not know what to make of that. I wrote nothing about it, filed it in the part of my mind where I kept the things I had nowhere to put, and went to my own supper, where my counsel read me the day's reports, and I wrote my responses in my tight, practiced hand, and the great hall of Drevholt was exactly as it had always been. Functional, quiet, gray. She came back after supper as she'd said she would. She had changed her traveling cloak for a plain gray one, and she'd brought something from her canvas bag, a small bundle of dried stems that she set on the table without comment. She sat in the same chair and was quiet for a moment, looking at me in that direct, uncomplicated way. I'm going to talk, she said. If that's all right, not about the curse, just talk. You don't need to respond unless you want to. I've found that silence in a room changes depending on whether there's speech in it or not, and I want to see how this one changes. I inclined my head. She talked. Not about anything consequential. She talked about the Ashfin pines, the particular way they grew in the valley bottom, leaning toward each other across the path as though they were in conference, and how, if you walked through them at dusk, you had the persistent feeling you were being discussed. She talked about a root she had been trying for 2 seasons to convince to flower in poor soil, the various arguments she had offered it, practical, then philosophical, then, in a low moment, emotional, and the small triumph when it finally had produced 3 waxy yellow blooms that she had felt were a personal victory rather than a botanical one. She talked about a cat that had decided to live in her workroom and had strong opinions about which dried herbs were stored correctly and which were not, expressed through the selective toppling of storage jars. She talked the way people talk when they are not performing anything. She talked the way you speak to someone you have known long enough that silence between you means comfort rather than awkwardness. Except that we had met 4 hours ago, and she did not seem to find this incongruent. I sat across the fire from her and listened. I realized, sitting there, in the specific way you realize something you have known for a long time but not faced. I had not been spoken to like this in 93 years. I had been spoken at, reported to, consulted, advised. I had been addressed with the particular care that people use around a man who cannot respond in kind, a careful simplicity that was not unkind but was, over decades, its own form of isolation. I had not been spoken to as though I were a man sitting by a fire who might be interested in the opinion of a cat about dried herbs. Something in my chest shifted. It was very small. It was the size of a door opening a crack in a room that had been sealed for a long time. I was aware of it the way you are aware of a sound in a silent house, with your whole attention, suddenly, before you have decided to pay attention. My wolf. Not his voice, not his presence clear and whole, just a warmth faint and deep the way a coal looks before it catches, present, there. I sat very still. I did not reach for it. I had learned in the early years that reaching for it made it recede. I simply let it be there and went on listening to Senna talk about the Ashfin pines in the particular dusk light. After a while she wound down naturally, the way a person does when they have said what they came to say, and sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, "How long has it been since someone talked to you like that?" I reached for the pen. I wrote a very long time. She nodded, not with pity, with understanding, which is different. "I thought so," she said. "The room feels different when you're spoken to as a person. I noticed it about 10 minutes in." She looked at the bundle of dried stems on the table. "I want to try something tomorrow, not a rite, nothing formal, just some things I use with patients who are sealed inside themselves. Fever patients, grief cases, things that stop responding to the outside world. I've had some luck." She paused. "I'm not promising anything." "I know," I wrote. "No one promises anything anymore. I have had 93 years of managed expectations." She looked at this, and then she laughed, a real laugh surprised out of her, warm and brief. "That's very fairly put," she said, and she stood, picked up her bundle and said she'd see me in the morning. I sat by the fire after she left. The warmth behind my ribs was still there, not growing, not receding, simply present like a witness. My wolf had not stirred in 40 years. I was careful not to think about it too directly, for fear of the particular grief that comes from hoping for something that might be nothing more than the way a wishful man interprets the ordinary warmth of a good fire. But I noticed it. The next morning she asked to see the room where the curse had been laid. I had not been in that room in 60 years. It was a lower chamber, not far from the gate, the room where Edra had stood when she spoke her final words and walked out. The council used it for storage now. It smelled of old paper and the cold particular to stone that never gets sun. Senna walked around it slowly. She didn't say much. She crouched and put her hand flat on the floor in 2 or 3 places, which was a thing none of the other healers had done. She spent some time looking at the wall near the door, not the wall itself, but a point slightly above it, her head tilted in the way she had when she was thinking. "There's something in the architecture of this," she said, not to me specifically, not to herself specifically, but to the room. "She built it to last. But she built it for something. Curses built for pure malice degrade not quickly, but they lose their edge. This one hasn't degraded at all, has it?" I shook my head. "That means she had a reason, not just spite." She turned and looked at me. It's still not something I can prove, but I keep coming back to it." She looked at the wall again. "Do you know anything about what Edra's grievance actually was? Not the reason she was expelled, but what she felt." I picked up the pen I had taken to carrying at all times, a habit of 93 years. She believed she had been wronged by a specific member of my pack, an elder who had died before I took the alpha position. I know the broad outline, not the details. "She lost someone," Senna said. "It was not a question." I considered. "I believe so." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "What does the moon blessing for Drevholt say? The founding one, the text?" I looked at her. This was not something any healer had ever asked. I wrote, "I would need to show you the record room. It is not something I can recite." "Could we?" We went to the record room. It was a long room lined in shelves, with the particular quiet of a place that holds old things carefully. I found the founding document without difficulty. I had read it many times and said it before her. She read slowly. I watched her face. At a certain point, something in her expression changed. "Here," she said, and pointed to a passage I had read many times without finding significant. The old script read, "Let the bond of this place hold, and let its sealing be broken only in the presence of that which is freely given and freely received, offered without rank, without payment, and without fear." I had always interpreted this as a general covenant between the alpha and the pack. "What if it's not about governance?" Senna said, reading it again. "What if it's about a specific kind of breaking?" She looked at me. "Edra built her curse to last, and she built it on the architecture of Drevholt's own moon blessing. That's why the rites don't work. The conventional seal-breaking approaches don't catch because the curse isn't sealed the conventional way. It's sealed inside the founding covenant." She tapped the text. "Freely given, freely received, without rank, without payment, without fear." She was quiet. I think she was sure no one would ever break it, because what she wove into it was the one thing she'd never had from this place. I looked at the document, then I looked at her. "Kindness," I wrote. She held the paper carefully. Simple, freely given, undemanding kindness. Not rank, not power, not a right, just someone being kind to you as a person without anything to gain from it. She set the document down. "That's why every healer failed. They all came with the intent to cure you. The intent itself is the wrong thing." She looked at me and her expression was careful, considering. "I almost told you I thought I might be able to help you if I had." She stopped. "If I'd come in here with the goal of curing you, it wouldn't work either, would it?" I did not know. I wrote, "I cannot know for certain, but the logic fits everything I have not been able to explain." She nodded. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said simply, "I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing then, sitting with you, talking, and trying not to think of it as trying." "Is that not a contradiction?" I wrote. She smiled. "Probably, but it's the best I've got." That evening, she came again to the small receiving room. She talked about the journey from Ashfin, the way the road goes through a stretch of birch trees about a day out, and how at this time of year the leaves are turning and the whole passage is gold and white. And she had stopped the cart and just sat in it for a while, because it seemed rude to simply drive through something that beautiful. She talked about a woman in her village who had been refusing to eat for 3 months after losing her husband, and the particular combination of things that had finally worked, not medicine, as it turned out, but sitting with her every morning and reading aloud from a book of old stories the woman had loved in childhood. "She didn't need to be fixed," Senna said. "She needed to be accompanied. There's a difference." I was listening very carefully. Not to the words exactly, though the words were good, but to the thing beneath the words, which was, she was here, in this room, with me, talking to me as though I were a man worth talking to, without any design in it, without any plan or intent, simply because she was a person who talked to things and I was a thing in the room. The warmth behind my ribs was stronger than the night before. My wolf. Not just a coal now, something larger, a fire that had been banked for a very long time and was remembering what it was. I sat very still. Senna had paused in whatever she was saying and was watching me. "Something happened," she said. I picked up the pen. My hand, I noticed, was not entirely steady. "My wolf, he is closer than he has been in a very long time." She was very quiet. She did not make a sound of triumph or relief or excitement. She simply looked at me with that steady attention and said, "Does it feel like the curse is changing, or like something underneath it is?" I thought carefully. Underneath it. The curse is the same, but something below it is. I paused, searched for the word, awake. She nodded. "All right." She was quiet for a moment. "I want you to know that I'm still just sitting here. I'm not trying to do anything. I want to be very clear about that." "I know," I wrote. She looked at the fire. After a while she said, "Can I ask you something about your wolf? Not about the curse, just what is he like? What was he like before?" No one had asked me this, not in 93 years. My counselors were careful not to raise the wolf because it had become, over time, understood as a grief. I set down my pen and thought about how to answer. Then I picked it up again. "Methodical," I wrote. "Not like some wolves, not loud or impulsive. He thinks before he moves. He has always been more certain than I am. When I was young and unsure of a decision, he was already committed. He knows things before I know them." I paused. "He knew the mate bond was real when I had begun to doubt it. He never stopped believing she existed, even after I did." Senna read this slowly. When she looked up, her eyes were brighter than they'd been. "That's a good wolf," she said. "Yes," I wrote, "he is." We sat in the quiet. The fire was warm. Outside, the mist moved through the Drevholt pines in its slow, patient way. I thought about my wolf, who had been methodical and certain and sealed away for 93 years, and who was now just barely, just at the edge, present. After a while Senna said, "I want to tell you about something that happened when I was younger. It's not especially dramatic, but I've been thinking about it since I arrived." And she told me about a winter when she was newly apprenticed to the remedy keeper who'd trained her, and there'd been a sickness moving through the Ashfin villages, and she'd spent 3 weeks going from home to home, and by the end of it, she was so tired that she'd sat down on a stranger's doorstep in the middle of a snowfall and simply couldn't get up. And a very old man had come out and given her a cup of something hot and sat with her without saying much of anything, just present, just there, until she could stand again. "I never knew his name," she said. "I went back to find him the next year and the house was empty. But I've never forgotten what it felt like just to have someone sit with you when you can't get up. No purpose to it. Just company." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I wrote, "That is what you have been doing." "I know," she said, not with any significance in it. Simply, "Yes, that is what I have been doing." The fire cracked. Outside a wind, a shift in the mist, moved through the pine branches with a sound like breath. My wolf rose. Not the faint warmth of the night before, not the cold beneath the bank. He rose the way a tide rises, not in a single surge but in a building certainty, filling in the sealed places. And I felt him for the first time in 93 years, clear and present and absolutely certain, as though he had never been away, as though the ceiling had been nothing more than a door he'd been waiting for someone to open, and someone finally had. I put down the pen. My hands were still. Senna was watching me. I could not speak. Not yet. The curse was still there. I felt it, the old binding, like a scar. But below it, or through it, or in the space the warmth was making, my wolf was present and he was looking at her. He was not searching. He was not asking. He had the expression, if a wolf can be said to have an expression, of a creature who has known the answer for a very long time and has simply been waiting for the rest of us to arrive. I knew what he was telling me. I had known, I thought, since she had sat down in the chair without waiting to be invited and begun talking about Ashfin pines. I had known, and I had not let myself think it, because hope had been a dangerous thing for a very long time, and I had learned to keep it on a very short lead. She was still watching me, not with alarm, with that same steady, present attention. "Your wolf," she said. I nodded. "Is he?" I nodded again. She let out a breath, not triumphant, not relieved exactly, something quieter than either. "Good," she said very softly. We sat in the silence that was no longer quite so sealed. The third night. She came as she had the 2 nights before. The small receiving room, the fire, her chair, which she had begun to think of as hers, which I had begun to think of as hers. She had brought dried pine needles this time, from the Drevholt forest, she said, because she'd asked the groundskeeper and he'd looked at her with the particular expression of a person being asked a completely ordinary question in a completely unexpected context, and she found that expression charming. She talked about the soil under Drevholt's pine forest, which she had investigated that afternoon with the groundskeeper's somewhat bewildered assistance. She had found, she said, 3 different root systems she hadn't seen in the Ashfin Valley, which suggested the growing conditions were more unusual than she'd initially assumed. And she had asked the groundskeeper if she could take samples back when she left, and he had said he supposed so, and she had said thank you and meant it very thoroughly, which the groundskeeper had also found disorienting but in a good way. I listened. My wolf was fully present now. He had been present since the moment he'd risen the night before, steady and warm and certain in that methodical way of his, not urgent but absolute. He was watching her with the same quality of attention I had learned from him over a long life, the attention of something that already knows and is waiting for the knowing to be named. The bond thread, which I had not felt in 93 years, was there. Not blazing, not overwhelming, simply there, a warmth between us, invisible and real, the way a root system is invisible but real, doing its work underground where you cannot see it. I felt it when she spoke. I felt it when she laughed at something she'd said, which she did sometimes, a small private laugh as though her own thoughts had surprised her pleasantly. I felt it when she paused and tilted her head to think. She was my mate. My wolf had known it from the moment she walked into the receiving room and sat down without being invited. I knew it with the particular clarity that comes from having something returned to you that you had stopped being certain was real. She did not know, or she did not know she knew. I thought she felt something. The way she sometimes paused mid-sentence and glanced at me before continuing had that quality of a person checking something they weren't sure of yet. But she had come here with no design, no intent to gain anything, and I thought that this was precisely why it was working, because the moment she came with intent, something in the Covenant's architecture would shift, and I did not know what would happen. So I sat and listened to her talk about root systems. After a while she said, "You seem different tonight." I reached for the pen. "My wolf is with me. He has been since last night." She read this. I'm glad," she paused. "Does the rest of it feel different, the voice, the bond?" "The voice is still sealed," I wrote. "The bond," I stopped. I did not know how to write the rest of it without naming what I knew, and naming it felt, in this delicate and particular moment, like exactly the kind of intent that should not be introduced yet. The bond feels present, in a way it did not before you arrived. She was very still. Then she said carefully, is that significant? Or is it just that the curse loosening in one place has loosened it in another?" I looked at the fire. I wrote, "I don't know," which was not entirely true, but was as much truth as I thought the room could hold without tipping into something I was not sure was wise. She nodded. She was quiet for a moment. I thought she was going to move on, to go back to root systems or the old man on the doorstep or something else from the safe country of her ordinary life. Instead she said, "Can I ask you something personal?" I inclined my head. "Were you lonely?" she said. "I know that seems obvious, 93 years in silence, of course, but I mean not just the silence. Were you lonely in the way where you'd stopped noticing it because noticing it took more than you had?" I was very still for a long moment. Then I wrote, "Yes." She looked at the word for a while. Then she looked up at me and her face was not pitying, something more than pity and less heavy, compassion without the distance. "I'm sorry," she said, simply without performance. I had been apologized to before, of course. Over 93 years. Formal apologies, sympathetic apologies, the careful apologies of people who wanted to acknowledge a difficulty without being asked to do anything about it. I had accepted them all with the same composed inclination of the head. This one landed somewhere different. She was looking at me, and she said, "I'm glad I came." And she meant it the way you mean something when you are not trying to comfort someone but simply telling them the truth. I thought, so am I, and then I thought, that is the most alive I have felt in 93 years. And then I stopped thinking, because she had shifted forward in her chair and reached out, not with any particular purpose in her movement. The way a person reaches towards something when they are thinking about something else, and she touched my face. Just her palm against my jaw. Checking for fever, I would understand later. It was what she did with patience. She told me this afterward, matter-of-factly, the way she was matter-of-fact about most things. She was checking for fever because I had seemed very still and she had wondered, professionally, if something was wrong. The curse shattered. There is no other word for it. It did not dissolve or unwind or fade. It shattered, like ice over a river when the temperature changes suddenly and the whole surface comes apart at once. And underneath it the water is moving, has always been moving, was never anything other than alive. I felt it go in a single instant, every sealed place breaking open simultaneously, and my wolf rose into the full presence of himself, and the bond flared between us, between me and Senna, between the place in my chest that had been sealed and cold for 93 years and the warmth of her hand against my face, and I heard my own voice. Not from somewhere else, from me, in my chest and my throat and my mouth after 93 years. I heard myself say her name. Senna. It came out rough and low, barely louder than the fire. But it was real. It was sound and it was mine, and the word it made was her name, because that was the only word that came first, the only word my voice went to when it came back after 93 years of sealed silence. She went very still. Her hand was still against my jaw. Her eyes were very wide. "You," she said. "Senna," I said again, still rough, still quiet, but there, completely, undeniably there. Her breath came in sharply. Her hand pressed very slightly against my face, not pulling away, staying. I reached up and put my hand over hers. "Senna," I said for the third time, because I had 93 years of her name unsaid behind me and my voice was learning what it was for. "I can hear my wolf. I can hear the bond." I stopped. My voice was unsteady, not with grief, but with the overwhelm of having it at all, of hearing the words form and leave me and exist in the air. "I know what this means. I know what you are to me. I will not press you with it, but I need you to know." She was very still. She was looking at me the way she had looked at the ceiling the first day, with that uncomplicated, direct attention. Her hand had not moved. "I know what fated mates are," she said, after a long moment. "I'm not from a high pack, but I know what it means." "Yes. And your wolf is certain. He has been certain since you walked in and sat down, without waiting to be invited." Something moved through her expression, surprise, and something warmer than surprise. "That's not very long," she said. "He is a methodical wolf," I said. "When he is certain, he has thought it through." She looked at me for a long moment. The fire was warm. Her hand was warm. The bond between us was present and quiet and real, and my wolf was whole, and my voice was in my own chest where it belonged, saying her name. "I came here with nothing to gain," she said. "You know that." "I know it. I didn't come to be a queen or a Luna or any of that. I came because someone asked me to, and I thought maybe I could help, and I had no idea." "I know," I said. "That is precisely why it worked. The founding covenant of Drevholt required something freely given and freely received, offered without rank or payment or fear. Every healer who came before you came with the intent to cure. The intent itself was the wrong thing. I looked at her. You came with nothing but yourself, kindness freely given. The curse had no surface to hold against it. She was quiet. Then she said very softly, "That's quite a design for a cure." "It is." And now, I said, and heard myself say it, and felt the extraordinary, uncomplicated reality of my own voice in the air. Now I can speak. My wolf is with me. The bond is real, and you are my mate, and whatever you decide to do with that, whatever you want, I will not push you. You have given me everything already. The rest is your choice. She looked at her hand, which was still against my jaw. Then she looked at me. "I think," she said, after a very long time, "that I would like to stay a while longer. If that's acceptable." Something in my chest, the place that had been sealed and cold for 93 years, opened fully. "That is more than acceptable," I said. In the morning my council came. They had heard, the whole keep had heard, because sound travels in stone buildings, and the Alpha King of Drevholt had spoken for the first time in 93 years, and even in the deep of night the keep had known it the way a body knows when a fever breaks. Bren came first, stopping in the doorway of the small receiving room with an expression I had never seen on him before, not the measured, careful expression of a man who has served a cursed king for 40 years, but something younger, something undone. Behind him my steward and 2 of my senior counselors, and after them, filling the corridor, more of the pack. I stood. They were looking at me. Not at Senna, though she was there, still in the chair, still unhurried, still with the particular quality of being a person who belongs exactly where they are. They were looking at me, and the quality of their looking was something I had not experienced in a very long time. They were listening for me. They were waiting. I said, "Good morning." The corridor was very quiet. Bren put one hand on the door frame. His jaw worked once, and then he said nothing, because there was nothing to say that was adequate to the moment, and he was a man who knew when silence was the right answer. I said, "The curse has broken. My wolf is returned. I am, as I have always been, your alpha, and I have something further to tell you." I looked at Senna. She was watching me with that steady, uncomplicated attention. She did not look alarmed. She did not look as though she expected anything. She looked like herself, which was, I had come to understand in 3 days, the most consistent and reliable thing about her. "This is Senna of Ashfin," I said. "She is my mate. She is fated and the bond is acknowledged, and she is—" I paused. "She has not yet agreed to be my Luna. She will decide that in her own time, and I will wait as long as is needed." I held her gaze. "But she is the reason I can speak, and the reason my wolf is home, and I will not have any one of you treat her as anything other than what she is." The corridor was entirely still. Then Bren said, in a voice that was not entirely steady, "Of course, my lord." And then he did something I had not seen my senior counselor do in 40 years of service. He inclined his head, deeply and without reserve, towards Senna. One by one the others followed. Senna looked at the corridor full of bowing wolves, and then looked at me, and there was something in her expression that was not overwhelmed, exactly. More like someone who has been handed something they were not expecting to be given and is turning it over carefully, assessing its weight. "You didn't have to do that," she said, quietly enough that only I heard. "I know," I said. "I hadn't decided yet." "I know that too," I looked at her. "But they should know who you are, whatever you decide. You walked in here with nothing to gain and you gave my wolf back to me. The pack has a right to know that." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's a very long way around to asking me to stay." "It is." She looked at the corridor, then at me, then at her canvas bag, which was still by the chair, still scruffy, still repaired in different colored thread. "I'll want to go back to Ashford eventually," she said. "There's a woman there who needs someone to read to her in the mornings, and root samples I intended to take, and a cat with opinions about dried herbs." "All of those things can be arranged," I said. "I have a great deal of organizational capacity and very little useful occupation for it at the moment." The corner of her mouth turned up. "That's also a very long way around." "I have been writing instead of speaking for 93 years, I said. "I may be somewhat indirect." She stood up. She picked up her canvas bag and slung it over her shoulder, and she came and stood in front of me. She looked up at me with that direct, uncomplicated gaze. "I came here with nothing to gain," she said. "I know. And I still have nothing to gain. I want you to know I'm not deciding anything because of—" She gestured vaguely at the corridor full of bowed wolves, at the keep, at whatever her gesture encompassed of what being a Luna would mean. "I'm deciding based on what I actually want." "That is all I want," I said. "It is all I will ever want, your actual choice." She nodded. She thought about it for a moment. My wolf was very still, in the way he was still when he was most certain, not holding his breath, just present, just waiting, because he had always known and was simply watching the rest of the world arrive. "All right," she said. "Yes." The corridor was very quiet. Then Bren, who had no business having heard that and certainly had, said something to the steward in a low voice, and the steward made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, and was something entirely reasonable for the occasion. And very quickly it seemed as though everyone in Drevholt was in the corridor or close to it, which was, I thought, also entirely reasonable. I took her hand, not dramatically, just her hand in mine. She looked down at it and then up at me, and the bond between us was present and quiet and real, exactly what it had always been, exactly what it was always going to be. "I should let someone know about the root samples," she said. "The groundskeeper will need instructions or he'll lose the labels." "I will have someone write it down," I said. "You could write it yourself," she said, "now that you're not limited to it." "I could," I looked at her. "I find I am somewhat occupied at the moment." She laughed, that warm, brief, genuine laugh that had, I thought, been doing its work on the curse long before either of us understood what we were doing. I had not spoken in 93 years. I had governed in silence and ruled without a voice, and kept my wolf sealed away in the cold behind a Packwitch's spite and a covenant's fine print, and I had been patient with it in the way a stone is patient with a river, not by choosing patience, but by having no other option. What I had not expected in all those years was that the cure would arrive carrying a canvas bag sewn in 4 different colors of thread, talking to the walls about pine trees. My wolf had known. He had always known. He is a methodical creature, not given to rushing or to drama, and in the 3 days he was given to observe Senna before the curse broke, he had come to the same conclusion he had been moving toward, I suspect, long before she arrived in Drevholt. He is more certain than I am. He thinks before he moves. He knew. And when she touched my face, not with intention, not with the aim of anything, just the way she did everything, with simple, unhurried attention, and the curse came apart and my voice came back, and the first word I said was her name. That was not the moment the bond was made. That was the moment I was finally allowed to say that it already existed. She stayed through the autumn. She went back to Ashford twice. Once for the woman who needed someone to read to her in the mornings, which she arranged with the help of a younger woman in the village who she had, apparently, been quietly mentoring without telling anyone. And once for the root samples, which arrived at Drevholt in carefully labeled parcels, and filled a section of the keep's southern workroom with the smell of pine and ashen earth. The cat in the end came too. It arrived in its own traveling crate, sent ahead by the village elder with a note that said simply, she was going to pine for the herbs. The cat had strong opinions about Drevholt's storage systems as well, it turned out. Some things are universal. Bren performed the Luna ceremony on a gray afternoon in the great hall, with the pack gathered, and the mist outside pressing its patient face against the high windows. He told me privately beforehand, been practicing the words for some time, because he had intended to be ready when the day came, even when he had not known when it would. I thought that was very like Bren. Senna stood beside me in a dress that was simpler than anyone in the court had expected, and she looked like herself, which is to say, she looked composed and present and entirely unimpressed by ceremony, which is exactly what the Alpha King of Drevholt needed for the rest of his very long life. I said her name, as I had said it first, 93 years of silence behind it and nothing at all in front. She said mine, which was the first time I had heard it spoken aloud in longer than I could remember. My wolf was satisfied. He had the expression he always had when something he had been certain of was finally named. Not triumph, not relief, just the particular stillness of a creature who was always right and has simply been waiting for everyone else to catch up. Outside, the Drevholt pines stood in the mist, leaning toward each other the way Senna had described the Ashfin pines, as though in conference, as though discussing something they had known for a long time. My shoulder, where the Luna mark had settled, did not trouble me. She was here. That was enough.